Hello, you're watching Tell It Like It Is, and my name is Kathy Benuck. You know, it's pretty indisputable that over the past few years we've witnessed an awful lot of changes which have made, I think, pretty much all of us very uncomfortable. We've seen a lot of lives being changed by job losses, by extended and long-term unemployment, by dropping property values, by house foreclosures, and, you know, quite honestly, by prices that seem to just continuously rise on all of the things that we need and that we use on a daily basis. You know, gasoline for our cars, food for our table, everything, clothing, name it. Are we foolish to wonder about the future and if we have the wherewithal, personally, collectively, to survive it with our heads above water? I don't know. Should we worry that our children and our grandchildren are never going to be able to obtain the so-called American dream? Will we turn the corner and will America prosper? Is better government possible? Will our country go into the future as the land of opportunity where almost anything is possible for anybody willing to work hard enough? Will politicians really remember, or at least understand, that government is supposed to be for the people, not the other way around? You know, call me crazy, but I am. I'm really worried about all of these things. And even if things are great for you, you know, sitting there watching this show, I still truly believe that you need to be worried too. So we're going to tackle some of these questions today. And my guest, who you can already see sitting beside me, is no stranger to Tell It Like It Is. He's been here before, so I won't go through the whole long, you know, biography and so on. Greg Moore, he's the New Hampshire State Director for Americans for Prosperity. And AFP has really become an important voice in the national dialogue on all these major issues. And Greg himself has an extremely lengthy background in New Hampshire government, a lot of experience working with all of the issues here in New Hampshire and nationally, so a lot of familiarity with all the little ins and outs and ifs, ands, and buts. So I've asked him here today to discuss those subjects, all of those subjects I mentioned that are impacting us and will continue to impact our lives as well as our own personal prosperities. So I don't think I need any more of an introduction. Greg, good to see you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate being able to come and speak to your viewers about what are a number of very important issues facing both the state and the federal government right now, and it's really, I think, a very, very important time right now because there are a lot of things going on. The implementation of Obamacare, the debt and budget talks that are going on right now in Washington, as well as some of the things that are going on in the State House. So I think that right now is a very important time to talk about a lot of these important things and how it's going to affect real people. It's going to affect the people sitting around the table making their decisions about their lifestyles. And you raised a great point talking about the American dream that we knew. Is that American dream going to continue to exist for future generations? And that's
not looking good.
A huge issue right now, and hopefully we'll begin to take the steps that it moves in a direction where it begins to gain momentum, and we can restore that whole principle of entrepreneurship individually and the ability for people to take opportunities and seize them and grow and take advantage both in terms of their civic involvement as well as to be able to offer a better lifestyle than they had, not just for themselves and their family, but for the country as a whole.
Well, you know, the other night, and you're all over the place, I'll tell you, you have a tremendous amount of energy because every time I read something in the paper or whatever, your name is there that you were there talking. And I heard you speak a couple of nights ago right here in Bedford. And one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting is you talked about economic freedom and explained that there really are 5 elements that are essential to economic freedom. And I was fascinated, and what I'd like you to do is kind of replay that. Tell us what those 5 elements are.
Well, Americans for Prosperity and the Americans for Prosperity Foundation are groups that are designed to educate about economic freedom and to promote economic freedom in our society and explain to people the importance of it, because the education component really is critical, because so many of our younger generations don't appreciate the connection between economic freedom and the quality of life. And there really is a nearly direct correlation in terms of, if you look at globally, the countries that are most free are the countries that have the highest incomes, the highest life expectancies, lowest infant mortality, the cleanest, have the least corruption in their government, and across a whole broad indices of quality of life, there is a connection. And when we say we talk about economic freedom, as you mentioned, there really are 5 components to that. The first and foremost is having a government that's small relative to the size of the economy, as a private sector economy. So in other words, you don't want government to be the economy. You want to have, because government by its nature, it's getting bigger and has gotten considerably bigger to its where it's a larger and larger role in our society. And there really is a problem there because government by its nature isn't free. Government does not follow free market principles, and it's not designed to. So the greater it expands, by nature, the less freedom we have. And not only that, because it tends to take more of our money from us, which deprives us of our personal freedom, financial freedom, and it sets out more and more rules as it goes along the way. So the first one is having a government small relative to the overall private sector economy. Secondly, it's a really important component is having regulation that's limited and smart. We have an enormous regulatory burden.
We do, and I want to talk to you a little bit about that.
Absolutely, and we will. And then the third item really is the importance of having a sound monetary policy, because if we're borrowing from the future, what we're doing is we're borrowing freedom from the future to have it today.
It's a good way of putting it.
And I like to tell people, borrowing the money just doesn't come from nowhere, and it's done in lieu of raising taxes. So people borrow so they don't have to raise taxes. But all you're doing is creating taxes for the future generations because they have to pay off that money, and they're going to need tax money to pay that off. So that's really the third piece. The fourth piece is having free trade. The ability of countries to trade between one another has been an enormous boon, and it's an enormous benefit. In America, free trade is a net positive to us. It can be difficult because there can be dislocations in the economy. So some people who've been doing a certain job for a while, that job might not be best suited for America, and another country might do it better than we do it. So there are dislocations, and those are painful. But on the net, free trade benefits America, and it's got to, but it's got to be a case where you have to make sure that that we ask our partners to do the same things that we do. So it's a really free trade, and then the last piece, and it's a very important piece, is to protect property rights with an impartial rule of law. And you can't have freedom and economic freedom if you can't know that something you own is going to be yours. If someone has the ability just to come into your house and take your stuff away, and leave you with nothing, well, first of all, why would you stay motivated? And secondly, it's going to shake your confidence in doing something if someone's just going to come along and take it, and particularly when the government comes along and takes something from you. I think we saw in Venezuela recently where the government came in and took over a whole chain of stores. And they're doing that where they just have they take privately owned stuff and they just take it for the government. And as we saw in the Soviet Union and other communist countries, that's not an unsustainable model because people just aren't motivated to work as hard and as diligently as they could because what's the benefit to them for doing so?
Is that happening here, but we kind of don't recognize it?
A lot of there are property rights that are being taken away from us. When the government, first of all, when the government comes along and passes a regulation that says you can't do with your land what you want to do, and by the way, we're not going to compensate you for your loss. So they say, you can't build here, or you can't build a house that does that. Your ability to do stuff with the land that you own is diminished. And so that's a case where property rights are lost. There are other examples where the government has come along and taken stuff away from people, and I'm not just talking about via taxes, but where they come along and maybe through eminent domain just decide we're going to take this away from you and they're going to take away your property rights. And so in many cases, those are instances where AFP gets involved in these issues and says, listen, this is a property rights issue. We want to be actively engaged in it. So those are the really 5 foundational roles of economic prosperity and economic freedom, which ultimately leads to prosperity, because that's what we want. We want to see solid institutions, because we believe that that really historically has been the way to see growth in America. And America was on a fantastic 20-plus year trend. I mean, and it had existed not just through Republican but Democrat presidents under President Clinton. We were on a fantastic trend, and there's a national economic index for freedom, economic freedom. And America, even as recently as 2002, was ranked number 2 in the world, only behind Hong Kong. But Hong Kong really isn't a fully thrived, developed. It's really a city-state. So as far as a large, full-scale economy, the U.S. was number 1 in the globe.
What's our ranking now?
And in the rankings that came out back in September, we'd fallen down to number 17.
17?
Right.
I didn't realize that we were that low.
And it's not just falling behind countries like UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. I mean, those are bad. Obviously, you prefer to be ahead of all those groups, Switzerland. Sure. But we're falling behind countries like Denmark and Finland, countries
That's remarkable.
Not historically known as being the most economically free countries. In fact, the good news is we actually went up from the year prior. We went from 18 to 17, but the only reason we did is because a little country in the middle of the Mediterranean called Cyprus had its economy implode.
Wow.
And that's the only reason why we've actually moved. It's not because of anything really that we did. The good news is that in Washington, we've taken a $1.6 trillion deficit annually down to about 650, and certainly hear the White House trumpet that, say, look, we've got the deficit down to $650 billion, mostly because they raised a considerable amount of taxes, but also because of the sequesters actually started cutting spending. But if you keep that in mind, that means that we are borrowing $2,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country, and borrowing that. And so we're spending $2,000 more for every person in this country more than we're taking in. And that's a scary thought. $2,000 of debt we're adding on, and we're trumpeting this and saying, look at we've reduced the deficit to only $2,000 per person.
There's not a single one of us that could do that with our own household budget.
No. I mean, we have to start paying our bills at some times, and our nation is going to have to start paying its bills pretty soon.
It's scary. And, having you explain it that way, I think is great, because you're kind of taking that big picture approach and breaking it down. And, a lot of us kind of hear the big numbers and guess, but we don't necessarily get down into the weeds on some of the results. In Washington, we use numbers like billions and trillions.
The average person can't even conceptualize a number.
No, you really
can't.
Just,
you talk about stacks of money that go into the sky and things like that, but really, when you start thinking about $2,000 for every man, woman, and child, people can understand that, because they know how hard they have to work to make $2,000, and they say, wait a second, listen, the government's borrowing that amount from me this year to spend, and they say, look, that's crazy. And so we need to get our whole entire budget situation under control. It is, to put it charitably, a mess in Washington in terms of the spending and some of the priorities they've set. And there's actually a committee of conferences that's meeting, and it's going to be meeting through the middle of December, and it's supposed to have some resolution that may or may not result in something by January 16th. The good news is we still have what's called the Budget Control Act in place, and that limits total federal spending. And so the good news is as long as that's in place, we'll still start to see this discretionary spending come down.
Are we bound by it, or can they wiggle around it?
Well, they can change it. It's a law.
Well, yeah, true. Yeah.
As you like to say,
put a bunch of legislators in the room,
one legislature,
make a sausage,
exactly. One legislature cannot bind a future legislature towards anything.
Yeah.
But I would point out that when you start looking at some of the advantages of the sequester in terms of getting things under control, but the sequester is still a blunt object. It cuts all programs across the board. Programs that are worthwhile, it cuts. Programs that really should have been eliminated in total are only given a haircut.
Just a few weeks ago, we saw some ridiculous cuts.
Oh well, look, and that's the problem we have, and that's the problem we have in Washington is people don't have the guts to get rid of ineffective, outdated programs. If we did that,
you're absolutely right.
That's the first problem. And that is a major problem. But the second issue is the fact that when they're talking about the sequester, they're talking about the so-called discretionary spending. The problem is that discretionary spending is only about a quarter of the budget. The other 3/4 of the budget are what they refer to as mandatory spending, and that's primarily driven by entitlements. And that's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other health programs and other support programs, a lot of these entitlement programs, welfare and things of that nature. And
there's absolutely some holes there in things like welfare that could be fixed.
Absolutely, absolutely. And these entitlements across the board have to be addressed. We cannot continue to go down because we're fighting over 1/4 of the budget. And if you were at home and you knew that 1/4 of your budget was going towards food and 3/4 was going to everything else, would you spend your time deciding whether or not you were just going to buy generic food, or do you think maybe you'd put a little more time and effort into the other 75%?
Maybe take the vacation out of the budget or
exactly,
what have you.
Exactly. And those are the types of decisions that need to happen in Washington. And certainly we'd like to see that, but I don't have a lot of hope, particularly as we're going into an election year.
Oh yeah, they're all afraid to do anything.
Not a lot of profiles and courage take place in an election year.
No, they're all too fixated with winning the next election. Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
And particularly now with the environment in Washington just being so toxic. It is so toxic right now. And nobody trusts anybody. The House doesn't trust the President doesn't trust the House, the Senate's not sure who to trust. And at the end of the day, when you have that type of situation where nobody seems comfortable working together, you're not going to. It's not the type of environment that's going to breed a consensus that would allow a broad fix that needs to happen.
Yeah, too much turf protection too going on.
Absolutely.
Now, when we think about federal regulations, there just seems to be a never-ending proliferation of them. And unlike major legislation, which we can all track, just even via the evening news, the average American, I mean, truthfully, probably has little knowledge of most of the regulations that exist. I know that you have a handle on how many there actually are, which when I heard you say a number of pages or something the other night, I kind of gagged. How are all of these affecting our economy?
Well, it's a hugely inefficient way of running your economy with the type of regulations. The Code of Federal Regulations, which is CFRs, you might hear that term, but it's actually a nice little acronym. As of course, there's always acronyms in Washington. They have a great way of using that so that nobody can actually understand what's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
And the Code of Federal Regulation, and this does, for example, does not actually include all the regulations for Obamacare in it, which is another 20,000 pages. But,
unbelievable.
But the CFRs actually consist of 82,000 pages.
82,000.
That means
how many legislators even have a clue about 10 of those pages?
Oh, well, if you've ever actually sat down and read a CFR, and I, in my old role working as the Director of Public Affairs and Government Relations with the Department of Health and Human Services here in New Hampshire, had occasion to read through a number of the CFRs, and I'll tell you, it's tough sledding. But assuming you could find somebody who was willing to read 100 pages of CFRs a day, it would take 2.5 years to read through all the Code of Federal Regulations. On
its face, that's bizarre.
But what's more damaging is the impact it has on our economy.
Yeah.
The cost estimate of the impact on our economy of regulations is $1.75 trillion each year. $1.75 trillion. If you took that out of the equation, that would be enough money to employ 43 million Americans with good middle-class jobs.
Wow.
43 million Americans could be employed as a result of. We could get rid of our employment problem that we're having right now in America if we could get our regulations under control.
Wow. And how many of these are, like, for all intents and purposes, useless or outdated or duplicated? Or
part of the problem is there is a legacy effect that seems to take place in which agencies become accustomed and are used to working around all these regulations, so they don't want to get rid of them. Because that's how they do business. A lot of people ascribe a lot of nefarious thoughts to a number of these regulations, but in reality, I think what you'll find more often than not is just that they're comfortable with them because that's what they're used to working with. And
so there's a certain amount of laziness involved.
Exactly, or unwillingness to change. I like to refer to it within government as a tyranny of custom. And
that's a terrific description.
and it is. It really is a problem. And so what you need to do is you need to have some sort of outside group whose focus is on making sure that our economy is as strong as possible, that's willing to come in and say, you know what, agency, you might love that regulation because you've gotten used to it, but you don't need it, and it's not helping anybody.
And we certainly see that on the state level,
well,
without a doubt.
One of the beauties at the state level is that all of our regulations end at a fixed time and date. They go away after a period of time.
But meanwhile.
And right. But we actually have a committee of legislators that has to pass a regulation before it can take effect, which is something that in Washington there's an ability for the legislature to block it. So in other words, a regulation comes up and the House and the Senate could pass a resolution to block a regulation.
But how often does that happen?
It doesn't happen anywhere near often enough. But here in New Hampshire, we flip that on its head. We say a group of legislators need to say yes before you can do it, which is I think a significant benefit. Although I know a bunch of those legislators, and man, that's not a job I would want. That's a lot of tough sledding frequently. But if you look through the regulations from stem to stern, I think what you find is a lot of them are unnecessary and don't particularly do much to protect the citizens, and simply add a negative economic value to our economy, and that impacts jobs. That means that more people are out of work. That means that businesses take their business elsewhere, where there's much of a less regulatory environment, and they can do their business in a much simpler way, in a much cheaper way. And so it's costing us jobs, not just in the jobs it's costing us because people don't begin an economic activity, but also because people just take their business out of the country. It's probably great for Mexico.
Which we're certainly seeing that.
It's probably great for Mexico that we have all these regulations.
Yeah, well,
but
I don't live in Mexico.
there's a lot of people looking for jobs right here in New Hampshire and across the country, and I think we should be more focused on them.
I agree. Now, obviously we're going to get into Obamacare. It's here. And above and beyond the absolutely ludicrous problems with its rollout and the website disasters and such, daily, hourly almost, we're hearing a lot of troublesome stories from people throughout the country. Now, I know AFP is and has been closely following it. You did touch on it a minute ago, saying how many new regulations there are, which you might want to talk about that a little bit, related to Obamacare, above and beyond those thousands of pages. But and this is kind of a multi-tiered question, what are the biggest shortfalls of Obamacare? How is it affecting the general economy? How many tax increases does it include, which a lot of people didn't pay attention to or are just finding out about? And all of these various tax increases, bringing that down to the weeds, how are they affecting the piggy banks of the average American family?
Absolutely, and trying to talk about Obamacare in less than, say, 2 hours is a real challenge because there's so many things that are structurally and fundamentally wrong. I think the biggest problem with Obamacare, if you take a step back away from it, Obamacare was passed under the notion that it would help to reduce the number of uninsured individuals in America. That was the theory.
That was the so-called premise, right?
But the problem with that is that the reason why we have so many uninsured in America is because health insurance is too expensive.
Yep.
And people don't buy health insurance because they don't think it's a good deal for them.
Yep.
And that was the fundamental issue. And why is that? There's too much regulation. There's a third-party payment system that skews incentives and creates perverse incentives. And finally, beyond those two, which are significant in their own right, there are a number of subsidies that distort the marketplace and cause more expensive insurance to take place. So what Obamacare did was to add more regulations, to, in addition to a third party, add a fourth party, being the government, beyond just your insurance company. And
scary thought by itself.
And then have more subsidies.
Yeah.
So all the problems which are leading to high health insurance costs, Obamacare doubles down on them. And so it's no surprise that when the big premise of why you did a law was poor to begin with, it shouldn't surprise anyone that the actual outcome doesn't work out as well as some of the unintended consequences might take place.
And those people who predicted that were seen as naysayers.
Well, and unfortunately for us, we're finding out that they were all correct. But when you start looking at it, one of the biggest problems with Obamacare is that the law that was sold to the American people is very different from the law they're seeing.
Yeah.
And if you look at all the
We are hearing lots of people howl about that.
the broken promises that were made all
Yep.
from the beginning of the discussion throughout the passage of the law are all ringing hollow now. Of course, the biggest issue is the fact that President Obama said a family of four would see their health care costs drop by $2,500 a year.
Not.
And we're seeing just the opposite. Health care costs are rising.
Yep.
We were told that if you want to keep your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you want to keep your health plan, you can keep your health plan. Clearly, that's not the case.
We're seeing that right in New Hampshire.
Exactly, and we were promised by the president that there'd be a cap on out-of-pocket costs. Well, the insurance company said if you do that, things are going to be even more expensive, and so the president said, well, let's hold off on that. And it's just a litany of broken promises that were made throughout the selling of this plan that are just not coming true.
And when you add into the bargain that most legislators had never read the thousands of pages of it.
Well, you know, I think that's a problem. I think it's a tough ask to ask people to read 2,200 pages.
Yeah.
But
was that deliberate? You know, so they wouldn't read them.
Well, remember you have to pass the bill to find out what's in it.
I will never forget that comment.
But I think that you take a poor premise, couple that with broken promises when the rubber meets the road and these aspirational goals turn into a cold hard reality, and then you add on a layer on top of that the fact that the implementation of this has just been handled and mismanaged, and the overall incompetence of the federal government. I think we see what we're having right now, which is a near breakdown, and that's beyond the politics. It's impacting real people. One insurance company, and it's the largest, Anthem, announced that there'll be 22,000 cancellations here in New Hampshire as a result of Obamacare.
That's a huge number.
That's just one insurance company in the first month, and couple that with Cigna, Harvard Pilgrim, United, the other groups who do business here. Add all those together, that 22,000 number is going to grow significantly. And in the release by the Obama administration of the number of people who they didn't really technically sign up, they actually made it through the website process.
Which there is a difference.
Anthem, who's the only insurer in the marketplace, said that nobody enrolled in the first month because a lack of
Are you serious?
A lack of connectivity.
They have come out with that as a fact.
Right.
Oh my God.
Well, because of a lack of connectivity between the federal government, they weren't able to share the information because of problems with the website. But if 269 people made it through the process of the website, and now they're looking to hand them off to Anthem, but even so,
269 statewide.
269 statewide, 22,000 people just in Anthem that lost their health insurance. That means that for a program that was designed to reduce the number of uninsured, for every uninsured person that they're providing coverage to, 82 people have lost their health insurance.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that exactly will hold up over time, but the reality is it's having just the opposite effect. Nationally, 5 million people.
Well, I mean, it would seem as though now would be the rush for people to try to learn about it, to try to sign up, particularly if their coverage is going to be ending in just a few weeks.
And that's a huge issue, but I think there's a bigger issue right now that the administration is concerned about. It's something we call adverse selection. And part of the idea behind Obamacare, and the reason why they had that new tax, which they sometimes call the individual mandate, which the Supreme Court decided was a tax and not a penalty.
Yeah, the original 89 or 9089?
$95 a year for the
first year.
For the first year.
Now tell us the shocking number for the second year.
Well, it goes up to about $250 a second year, and
then keeps going.
But it's also a percentage of your income too.
Yes.
Whatever's higher.
Yes.
So if you're making above above $10,000, it's not going to be $95. It's going to be 1% of your income. But
that can get
pricey. And that money comes in, and it's designed to be giving subsidies out within the exchanges. But if you look at that, quantity that's known as of people who are joining, and the people who are the types of people who are joining, the idea was to force a bunch of people into the system, broaden out the base, so that you could provide an environment where you have a very large pool, so you can cover the really sick people, and you have a lot of healthy people to cover the sick people. Well, if a very few number of people sign up, chances are those are the sicker people, because they're the ones who benefit.
Yeah.
And if that
Healthy people might take their chances, particularly if they're of a younger age group, when
Well,
you really don't look ahead to think, oh,
it's not just that. I mean, for
sickness
them,
is inevitable.
for them, health insurance was a bad deal before.
Yeah.
But it's an even worse deal now,
Yeah.
because those costs are supposed to be shifted to the sicker people.
Yep.
So their costs are going to go up significantly. So now we're in an environment where if these people don't sign up, the sick people, the ones that sign up, next year the rates are going to go even higher through the roof. And if that takes place and the rates are through the roof, then the healthy people are going to say, whoa, it's even more, even worse of a deal now.
Yeah.
And so that's what's called in the insurance world the death spiral.
Well, I mean, if I were 30 years old and did not have any health condition, I'm certainly not thinking ahead to when I'm 60 years old and maybe will. And, I mean, truth be told, it's a whole lot cheaper for me to pay the penalty than it is to pay 12 months' worth of high premiums.
For a lot of young people, their health care costs, not health insurance, but health care costs over the course of a year,
they're not huge.
a couple $100.
Yeah.
Obviously a little higher for women than
If
for men.
if you have an annual physical,
Right.
which a lot of people don't,
Right.
or if you need a pair of eyeglasses or something.
For men, the standards out of the national standards are you get a physical once every 3 years until you hit.
Well, even some of the women's standards have
you get into your
changed.
40s.
I mean, just something like a pap test. It used to be annual. Now it's 3 years.
Right, and that's until you into your 40s. That they say once every 3 years for men, and but obviously women have costs that are a little higher than that. But the bottom line is, as these healthier people who say, listen, if I'm paying a couple $100 a year for health insurance, why does it make a lot of sense for me to spend $4,000, a couple $100 a year in healthcare costs? Why does it make sense for me to spend $4,000 a year in health insurance?
Exactly. That could be my a mortgage payment or my car payment or what have you.
And that's particularly true within the Obamacare environment, because now, under Obamacare, I can wait till I get sick and then sign up for health insurance.
Absolutely right.
And then what happens is when the healthier people have zero incentive, they just pay the penalty, the tax, and they say, look, I'll pay my 95 or whatever, 1%, write the check, and when I get sick, I'll sign up for a health plan, and you'll take care of me.
Yeah, because, I mean, obviously, you know, all of us work hard for our money. It doesn't matter if we're 25 years old or 65 years old. And, I mean, I think we all want the best for everybody. But at some point in time, you have to say, okay, but it's now it's going to stop coming out of my pocket. I've already given, you know, as much as I feel comfortable with, and I'm not going to keep giving this year.
And if I didn't have to spread the insurance out over such a large pool, if I said to that same 27, 28-year-old whose healthcare costs might be about $200-300 a year, I'll sell you a policy for $800 a year, because
what a deal.
As an insurer,
what a deal.
As an insurer, I'm probably still going to make out on it. But if I said I'm going to sell it to you for $800 because you don't have any significant health risks, and chances are you're not going to incur a lot of costs for me as an insurer, then that 27-year-old says, you know what? It's more than I expect to cost, but I do want to protect myself from the adverse consequences of something going really badly for me. I'll pay the $800. And in that instance, insurance might make a lot of sense. It's the same deal, for example, with life insurance or automobile insurance. If you're a good driver, you pay less because the insurance company knows that chances are you're not going to cost them a lot of money. You're probably going to do just fine. And then
if you live in a state where you don't have to have all kinds of different mandatory coverage, you're going to have the minimum.
Right. You're going to have a policy that suits your needs, and you're going to say this makes sense. And same is true as life insurance. If you are a young, healthy person and you want to buy particularly term life insurance, you can do it for a tiny amount of money.
Yeah, you can.
a tiny amount of money, you can do that, and the insurer gets to look at you and say, what are the odds that I'm actually going to have to pay out on you? And if the odds are small, then I'm going to sell you a policy, and it's going to make sense, because if that adverse thing does happen, you're protected, and we know we're probably going to make money in the end anyway. So the whole concept of Obamacare does not understand how incentives works, and instead decides, well, instead we're going to try to penalize people. We're going to try to punish people for not agreeing to make our system work. And that, as many people know, historically is not exactly the best way to try to convince people to change their behaviors. It just gets them angry, frankly. And people are getting angry right now as a result of it. And the 21 taxes in Obamacare, they're designed to help pay for the whole process. But even beyond that, I mean, we've also got $716 billion in Medicare cuts that are a result of Obamacare. We don't even know where those are going to come from yet.
And that is frightening.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, so many people are, in many cases, totally dependent on Medicare. And they've spent their lifetimes, helping finance it.
And I think, look, everyone understands the structural problems with Medicare. Social Security obviously was passed at a time when the average life expectancy was 64 and a half, and you don't get a check till you're 65. That seemed like a pretty good deal if you were the government at the time. But Medicare life expectancies were older, but still we said, okay, you're going to pay in over the course of your life, and you're going to get a benefit back for doing that. Life expectancies, of course, have gone up till 78 years old now, and so the average person's on the program, but what makes it more damaging from a long-term fiscal perspective is that healthcare costs are going up at a much faster rate than inflation. So you've got a situation now where the Medicare Trust Fund is set to become insolvent in 2033. So about 20 years from now. 20 years from now. And I tell people this, I mean, Social Security is a problem, and long run it's a problem. But if we do nothing, then what happens when Social Security becomes insolvent is people just get back a portion of the money they're expected to get back. It's not that easy with Medicare, because if we don't have the money, what do we tell people? Okay, you can't go to the hospitals on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We can go the other days. How do you make that work if the system isn't able to pay it out? So there's no question that we have to make some considerations as to how we deliver services in Medicare, and look at ways to make some structural changes there. But having said that, just saying I'm going to do $716 billion in cuts and we don't know where, and we'll have to go find it, and we're going to set up this independent physicians advisory board who are going to make these determinations about what we will pay and what we won't pay. That actually cuts a lot of the seniors out, and by taking it out of the legislative process, it removes it from elected officials as well. So these groups are fairly unaccountable in terms of...
And we're seeing too much of that these days.
Well, a lack of accountability, absolutely. It's a huge issue.
Not just in healthcare, and a lot of different things, education,
across the board. There's a lack of openness in government and a lack of accountability for what people do in government. And the ability to bring more transparency to government and bring more some responsibility to our leaders, whether they're elected or not, is a critical component to having a long-term open government that people can feel comfortable with. I mean, look at the approval ratings of government and of Congress and of our institutions nationally. They are disastrously low.
People are losing
don't trust
faith.
them, and that's not good. It's not healthy for our economy. It's not healthy for just our ability to continue to want to work. If people aren't happy with the government, they're going to try to find ways to avoid paying taxes, and because they don't think they're getting a good deal, and there are longer run consequences as a result of that. Well,
obviously one of the big parts of Obamacare has been this push to expand Medicaid in the states. As we know, our New Hampshire legislators could not arrive at a resolution this year during the session. So the governor then appointed her special commission. sounded good, but unfortunately both parties weren't equally represented. I mean, it really was more of a democratically controlled commission, so I don't think a lot of people were surprised at some of the recommendations that came out of it. So now we have a situation where she has called them back into special session. We have a situation where our Senate leadership has come up with some alternative ideas, and meanwhile, the whole mess is still going on. The fight has yet to play out. I don't think any of us can say what the heck is going to come out of it. So, and obviously, I think both plans, including the Republican one, have some problems. How is this whole expanded Medicaid thing going to affect our economy here in New Hampshire? How is it going to affect us as taxpayers? I mean, should the whole thing just be dropped? Is this, for all intents and purposes, is it opening the door to us having a state income tax? Because that's kind of the way I'm thinking.
Well, the first thing I would say is, having worked at Department of Health and Human Services,
and you have a handle on numbers and such.
Ran the Medicaid program.
Yes.
And having done consulting since I've left Health and Human Services,
yes,
on looking at different avenues and opportunities within the Medicaid program to find ways to bring efficiency and make the program work better. The first thing I'd say is this: I would never want to be on Medicaid. I would never want
I wouldn't want to be
a member of my family or a close friend to be on Medicaid.
No.
The program is substandard care. Part of that is because the rate it pays out at is about is a little more than 1/3 what private payer systems pay out, and as a result of that, a lot of doctors won't take Medicaid patients.
And can you really blame them?
No, I mean, if you're losing money on something, you stop doing it. Most businesses,
I mean, they have to earn a paycheck too.
We think of doctors as being fairly altruistic, but they're business people generally, like a lot of us.
And they have to go home and pay their bills too.
Absolutely. So when you look at New Hampshire, and roughly 1 in 5 doctors will not take a Medicaid patient, and
won't that get larger now if Medicaid expands?
It certainly will, and moreover, the 4 in 5 that will take Medicaid patients limit the number of patients that they'll
have
take.
to.
And so the quality of care drops. Instead of giving you the 20-minute appointment for your physical, the doctor stops by for 5 if you're on Medicaid. So you start to see situations in which the quality of care as a whole starts to degrade, and because of that, some of the outcomes we see at the national level for the Medicaid program are fairly disturbing. There was a study by the actually by the New England Journal of Medicine of Oregon, which expanded their Medicaid program. This was prior to the Obamacare, prior to Obamacare.
Okay.
And they did it in the lottery. So they had a certain amount of money they could spend, and they said, we're going to give these number of slots. And
really? A lottery?
It was a lottery. So some people
wow.
won the lottery and some people didn't.
Wow.
But that gave an interesting opportunity for scientists to come along and look at 2 people, and the only distinction between them is some won the lottery and some didn't, which is a great control group.
Yes.
And what they found was striking in that within the Medicaid program, looking at a number of health outcomes, the health outcomes were no better than the uninsured. So it didn't matter that you were on Medicaid. A lot of your physical health outcomes were not improved. So it's an open question as to whether or not Medicaid actually is a benefit for people. There was a long-term 5-year study by the University of Virginia that looked at surgical outcomes, and 900,000 patients across the board. It was adjusted for age, for demographics, for health conditions and prior health status. And what I found was remarkable. The people who are on Medicaid coming out of surgery were 97% more likely to die than people on private health insurance. Almost twice as likely to die as a result of surgery as people who have private insurance.
Yeah.
And what's really stunning is 13% more likely to die than people who had no insurance. So when you step back and you think about it,
that's scary.
It's a remarkable statement about the quality of care, and it shows that doctors respond to incentives just like the rest of us. And that's another important factor, and that is the fact that
Well, hospitals and everything else as well.
everybody within the healthcare sector responds to incentives just like everybody else in the world. And so when you look at Medicaid, the first problem is the fact that Medicaid is a substandard quality. So secondly is the fact that Medicaid is already starting to eat our state budget alive. And so when you have poor quality, when you have a program that's already too big, because again that growth rate in healthcare is much higher than revenues are growing, and much higher than all the other factors. It's putting a squeeze on things like education. Medicaid's putting a squeeze on transportation, public safety, things that I think most of us expect government to have a role in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's putting a squeeze on those. And it's really having a significantly negative consequence on our ability to move around within our own budget.
And we're talking the addition of,
they're
saying conservatively,
talking,
50,000 people.
Well, the Lewin Group did a report. They suggested the number was 58,000. And so the question is, why are you selling tickets onto the Titanic?
Yeah.
So that's one of the
that's a very pointed way of saying it.
We should be finding ways to reform a Medicaid program to make it better before we start worrying about adding more people to the program. But if you look within that 58,000, you find out some pretty strange anomalies. First of all, about 4,000 people are people who are eligible today, and basically because of the outreach efforts might sign on. So if you take those out of the equation, because they're actually not a new group, they're people who, if they knew enough and showed up at Health and Human Services, they could go and sign up. But there's a group of 20,500 out of that 54,000 now who are on private health insurance today.
Right now.
Who are currently on private health insurance.
Through employers and everything else.
And whether it's because their employer, if they saw a Medicaid alternative that they could move their employees to, or whether it's because the employee looked at the system and said to themselves, well, at my work I have to pay co-pays, I have to pay deductibles, Medicaid I don't have to do that, I'm just going to slide over to Medicaid. But in either instance, 20,500 people would be moving from high quality private health insurance onto a substandard Medicaid program.
On our buck.
On our buck.
We have to add that part.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we're taxpayers. And I think one of the strange things that happens in Concord is that when they walk into that building up there, they forget that state taxpayers are also federal taxpayers.
Yeah.
And it's
I know. It's always like federal money's free.
Where federal money apparently falls from the sky.
Yeah, I know.
But there's also within that group another 11,600 people out of the 54,000 who, if the state does not expand Medicaid, can get incredibly heavily subsidized health care through these new exchanges. And they would have to pay about $200 a year for a $9,000 policy, which would be...
That's cheap.
Which would be a higher quality policy.
Yeah.
It's a much better policy.
Yeah.
And again, it's in that private sector where the outcomes tend to be very good. So out of that 54,000, you look at it, over 32,000 people would be better off from a health care perspective if the state didn't expand Medicaid.
Well, since the Supreme Court, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, decided that the state can't be forced to expand Medicaid, shouldn't we just forget about it in New Hampshire?
Well, one of the questions we should be having is getting back to that last group, a group of about 22,000 people who would not get any coverage, who don't have coverage now, and would remain uninsured.
Okay.
And the question is,
and we
what do you do about
acknowledge that we probably should help there a little bit.
Exactly, but that's the group you should be focusing on, not dragging these other groups into a lower quality program. And if the state did not expand Medicaid, there are ways to try to provide care for those. Right now, today, this fiscal year, the state of New Hampshire will be paying to hospitals uncompensated care payments. That's care for people who aren't covered. $102 million. Instead of giving the hospitals a check, why don't we go and take that money and buy coverage for the 22,000 people? The
hospital would wind up with higher payments as a result.
Exactly. The hospital ends up getting
It's not like we're putting the hospitals out of business or anything.
Correct. So Right. I mean, where are they going to get their money, their health care?
Yeah.
Either they're going to get a hospital or they're going to go to the doctor's office, and most doctor's offices in New Hampshire are owned by hospitals.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in the end,
You're right. Yeah.
chances are it's going to end up in the same
Yeah.
place. The state of Indiana created something that they call a program called Healthy Indiana, and it has what are known as power accounts. But those power accounts involve personal responsibility. They involve allowing people to make their own health care decisions and the choices of how they want to spend the money that's been given to them to spend on health care. So
That
they
sounds
basically
reasonable to me.
they can basically get a health care voucher or credit card where they can spend money towards their health care needs. And
they do monitor it, that it can't be played around with for other uses, I assume.
Absolutely. So, I mean, they go into the doctor's office and there's a bill and they say, here's my Healthy Indiana card, and they run it through the card reader and they charge them whatever.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure it wouldn't be like the EBT cards.
Oh, no, it's a different, it's very, very much a different situation.
Good.
This is a program that's working. It has a 95% satisfaction rate among the people who are using it. 95%. I can't think of too many government programs where 95% of the people involved say this is a great idea.
Yeah, I can't
and so
think of
people
any.
actually like to be empowered to make their own decisions as opposed to trying to find a doctor when a good chunk of them won't even take a Medicaid patient, and trying to find care where you're frequently waiting in line because the hospital doesn't want to provide care to you because your reimbursement rate is so low. This is a brilliant solution. It's actually cheaper than providing Medicaid.
Is anybody in New Hampshire looking at it who can make a decision on this?
AFP's been working to bring these ideas to the legislature.
Are they paying attention?
I think certainly in talking with the Senate, and I've had some conversations with my old boss, John Stephen, and he thinks this is a great idea for New Hampshire because he's worked around the country with a number of states on their Medicaid overhaul. And that would be a much better solution for providing coverage for the 22,000 people than trying to drag 58,000 new people onto a program that's already failing.
Well, the state Democrats, which, the Democrats obviously control the House, are they going to listen to any of this, or are they just so partisan in politics that they're going to stick with all this Obamacare stuff and the stuff that came out of it because of the fact it was democratically
from our perspective, AFP is a nonpartisan group.
No, I know
Our focus is on ideas and issues, not on.
But what I'm
parties.
concerned about is the political, philosophy going to wind up being the predominant way this is solved.
And
I'm really worried about that.
That's a big issue. I do think that taking a step back and looking at the politics of it, I think that the Democratic Party as a whole has invested a considerable amount of energy into Obamacare and making sure that is going to stay around. And but that said, if you look at what's happening in Washington right now, after the outcry over people losing their health insurance plan, even Democrats are saying, "Listen, we have to do something." And I think that's what has to happen.
Enough, though. Are there enough?
I haven't seen it yet in Concord, but in Washington, I think that there's enough. There's a critical mass. There's when 5 million people are screaming at their senators and reps across the country, saying, "This is crazy. I just lost my health plan. I'm being forced into the exchanges, and I now need to buy a policy that's sometimes 50, 75, 100% more expensive than the one I just got kicked off because of your new law."
Well, now
and
let me ask you something.
They're angry.
Now, because you can see we're kind of coming into the time zone here. With all that, with what we're just talking about, how can any private citizen in New Hampshire, how can anybody listening to the show contact or what message should we be saying to them that we're not coming off as partisan to either party? We're not saying to Democrats, we think you're wrong on this and you have to change. We're not doing any of that. We are trying to communicate to them, listen up. You got to listen to all of us. You got to do the right thing. You got to forget whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. You have to approach this as a human being who presumably is sitting in Concord to represent your constituents. How do we get across to them? Knock off the partisan politics and face the problem and fix it.
I think that first and foremost, you start with the problems that a Medicaid expansion would bring. 20,000 people kicked off their private sector insurance plans. That means that a lot of people are going to lose their doctors, lose their hospitals. That's problem number one. Problem number two, because Medicaid doesn't have the copays or the deductibles that plans like yours and mine have, there's no incentive not to use as much care as possible. What that means as a result of that is that the utilization for people on Medicaid tends to be sky high because there's no reason for them not to go get as much care as possible. Okay. From our perspective, if you're paying $150 every time you go to the emergency room, you've got a disincentive to go in there. And so because of that, if people are on Medicaid, what you're going to find is a whole lot more utilization. That means that everybody has to wait longer. Not just the people on Medicaid, but everybody needs to wait longer because there's a lot more demand on the doctors, and there's only a finite number of doctors. So there's people being kicked off health plans. There is a longer waiting time, and then fundamentally there is that financial issue because ultimately, beyond just the federal costs, and again, we're federal taxpayers as well, there is a state cost involved in this, and that's a number that's growing. Governor Hassan said something that I found strange, is that this is a Medicaid a promise that they're going to keep paying this high amount, and you can trust the federal government.
Oh, well,
and I got to tell you what.
That message I can't
I got to tell you what. If you are buying promises about Obamacare, whew, that's not a good track record right now.
No, it's not.
And I think that we need to realize that if they change that promise, just like if you like your health plan, you can keep your health plan, we could be looking at picking up a significant amount of state costs. And those state costs could ultimately lead to the need to pass a sales or income tax if we're going to continue to offer those services. And that's serious. That's very serious, and it goes right to the quality of what we have here in New Hampshire.
So then it is incumbent upon us to be contacting our legislators.
Absolutely, but talk to them about the problems within the law. I don't think it's usually particularly effective to start saying this person did this or that person did that. Most
because then people get defensive.
Exactly. Most people will agree with you if they're Republican. You say, yes, I think Democrats are bad. Most Democrats will get defensive and say, what are you talking about? It's really not a problem. It's one of those cases where you need to approach your legislators and tell them, look, here are the problems that this policy is going to put in place. You need to start listening to us about those problems. Folks in Washington didn't listen to us when we were passing Obamacare, and now they're paying the price in terms of the public's opinion of them. If you don't want that to happen to you, start listening now. Okay.
Well, you can see the clock up there, tick, tick, tick. So I'm going to have to shut us down, unfortunately. There's a lot of stuff coming up in 2014 we have to pay attention to, so I hope I'm going to get you back for those.
Absolutely.
I'm going to end this show asking you one question, which is one that's on my mind and lots of other people, including people who are watching this show. And you can answer yes or no. In fact, that's all you get time for. Is expanded Medicaid in New Hampshire going to open the door for a state income tax? Yes or no? Open the door, not saying definite.
If the president's promise on Obamacare is broken, then the answer is yes.
That's what I wanted to get out of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, for having me.
I hope you all listened to everything you heard today. This is huge. You cannot continue to sit at home, watch the news, and gripe. You have got to get on the phone or send an email to your own state legislator and say, hey, lady, or hey, guy, enough already. Fix it, because you're killing us. That easy. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye-bye.